Hello and welcome back to Parc Fermé Parlay with Kieran Downey. We're here after a very interesting Chinese Grand Prix to dissect everything that happened. Now, watching the Grand Prix, there was moments where it was quite dull. There wasn't a lot going on, but when you really sort of dive into it, you realise that there was a lot of interesting things happening, and it's raised quite a few questions, and there's a lot to talk about. So we're going to dive right in. Now, as always, we'll be starting our race review with the team that finished the previous season last, and that is Sauber. Kicking things off with Gabriel Bortoleto, who qualified 19th, finished 17th. Bortoleto's race was really ruined from the outset, to be honest with you. He had a bit of a spin in lap 1 that put him towards the back of the grid. I think it actually put him last because he then had to pit for new tyres, and it really just ruined his race. He wasn't able to climb any further up. It's obviously a very tricky circuit to navigate. There's a lot of demand on your tyres. You've got to then prioritise your tyre management because you've only got so many sets of tyres, and he couldn't really make an impression to get any higher up the grid. He did obviously gain some positions, but it was sort of through pit stops where the other teams had then pitted for fresh tyres. By the time Bortoleto then went to pit, he was right back down the far end of the pack. So not a good race, I would say, for Bortoleto. The pace of the Sauber really wasn't there. And I don't know whether the Sauber is actually as good as what I thought it might be, because when I spoke yesterday after the qualifying, I thought, oh, you know, there's promising signs in the Sauber that Hulkenberg's managed to qualify pretty decently, and I actually now I want to role reverse, swap around Haas and Sauber, because I do think that Sauber is actually the slowest car on the grid. I was kind of thinking it was Haas, but I'm changing it again. I think it's Sauber. This is probably going to be a conversation we have throughout the year of who is actually the slowest team. Is it Haas or is it Sauber? And I'm locking in right now that it's Sauber because Haas actually ran a fairly alright race. Bortoleto's teammate Nico Hulkenberg, who qualified 12th, finished 18th. Again, really sort of highlighting just how off the pace the Sauber is. Hulkenberg had a terrible start to the race and again couldn't make an impression for the rest of the race. He was just languishing about at the back of the pack. Those drivers in that team have finished dead last. They, as I said, had zero pace. They really couldn't put in a fight at all. It was just a really poor outing for Sauber, and it's one that we've actually come to expect from that team, especially after last year. And I kind of think that this might be what we see from Sauber as we move on through Suzuka, Bahrain and everything like that. I'm not expecting massive things for Sauber. It will be incredibly unfortunate if Australia is the only points they manage to score, because after Australia I was kind of hoping for decent things from Sauber, but I do believe that what we've just seen is most likely the performance and the pace of that team. Moving on to Williams, and it's kind of a story of two halves down at Williams. You have Alex Albon, who qualified 10th, finished 9th, and Carlos Sainz, who qualified 15th and finished 13th. I have to say, when you look at Albon, I think he ran a pretty decent race. He was incredibly confident in the car. You could hear it through his radio messages. He was saying, you know, I am performing better than the cars around me, and he was able to sort of pick a couple of cars off, but through management of tyres, through pit stops and everything like that, 9th was really the highest that he could get. Still a decent result for Williams. It's more points in the bag, and some points for Alex Albon on his birthday, which is always quite nice. I think another thing that sort of plagued Alex Albon was unfortunately getting stuck in a DRS train, which it was sort of the case for the teams running in that low points, just outside the points places, that there was just a bit of a DRS train, and it was drivers swapping positions, but then swapping positions again through the next sort of lap. However, as I said, a decent wee race for Alex Albon, points on his birthday, more points for the team, and not a bad result for him. Carlos Sainz, on the other hand, was the sort of flip of that. He was really nowhere, to be honest, and he was mostly just running by himself. There was a bit of a gap behind him, there was a bit of a gap in front of him, and seemed to kind of struggle, to be honest with you, in that Williams. And I don't know what it is that's causing him to struggle. He kicked off the year with a decent performance in Australia, but has really not been able to make an impression this week in China. And I'll be interested to see how he fares at Suzuka in 10 days' time. But a fairly unfortunate race for Carlos Sainz, just was nowhere. He, as I said, was just running his own race. He was barely shown on the broadcast because he was just so alone. It seems to be whenever you hear them talking about Carlos, the team know what the issue is. Carlos knows what the issue is. He doesn't seem too worried by it, but there's just nothing happening for him at the moment. And it's a little bit depressing that he can't equal the performance that Alex Albon is having. Moving on to a team who definitely finished outside of where they should have been. They shouldn't have finished outside the points, and I think strategy calls and a couple of unfortunate incidents really pushed them down the pack. We have Isaac Hadjar, who qualified 7th, finished 14th, and Yuki Tsunoda, who qualified 9th and finished 19th. There was a lot of talk about the strategies going on through this race because there was the question of, do we do a 2-stop? Do we do a 1-stop? Can we make the tyres last to do a 1-stop? And a few teams made it work. Some teams couldn't. They had to do a 2-stop. And VCarb is one of those teams that went on to do a 2-stop, and it really damaged their race. They were running in an okay position. That second stop put them down the sort of far end of the pack, and they couldn't get back up. Through tyre management, the tyres were sort of going off quicker because they were stuck in dirty air, and the sort of fighting that they were having to do to try and get through the pack, they had to put a little bit extra onto the tyres. There was an unfortunate incident for Isaac Hadjar, who got dive bombed into the turn 14 hairpin by Jack Doohan and did end up getting pushed off the track by Doohan. So that kind of hurt his race. And Yuki Tsunoda with a very unfortunate incident where his left front wing just completely broke under load, I think it was. And not long after his pit stop, had to then re-pit to get his front wing changed, and it just plummeted him to the bottom of the grid, and he couldn't get back up, and he finished the race dead last. So, you know, an incident each for those drivers that hurt them even more when they were already hurting from a bad strategy call to put them onto the 2-stop. What is promising for that team is they do seem to have the fastest midfield car. They're qualifying very well. Their race pace is good. The car looks smooth. It's responsive, and they're not really having any issues. Those two problems, as I said, that they did have were unfortunate, and it was unlucky. The strategy call is what really pulled them down. Doing that 2-stop really hurt their race because in lap 43, they were running 15th and 16th. Obviously, Tsunoda's race was then further ruined by his front wing braking, but there is some promising takeaways that, as I said, they do have the fastest midfield car, it seems. It's just unfortunate that the team let them down through strategy, and they just got a little bit unlucky with a few issues out on track. Next up is the team that I thought was slowest, but actually had a pretty decent race, and that is Haas, with Oliver Bearman, who qualified 17th, finished 10th, and Esteban Ocon, who qualified 11th and finished 7th. Thank God Haas showed up to the racetrack today, I tell you that, because I was actually worried for Haas. It felt like they had done a complete 180 from last year and had gone back to sort of 2023 with having the slowest car on the grid. And, you know, we've come to China today and it's like they've turned the car on, finally. I think Esteban Ocon did a great job out there today. He qualified 11th. He was there to get the moves done. He didn't really seem to encounter much issues. The car looked racy. He was getting some solid moves done, and it's a great result for Haas to be able to go and get a P7 and get some solid points in the bag. His teammate, Oliver Bearman, who finished 10th, I was a little bit worried for Bearman at the sort of opening stages of the race. He didn't look to have the pace to sort of climb up the grid. And I really thought that the tyres would begin to hurt him and he would really just lose time and sort of fall back a little bit. But really surprised me with some fantastic overtakes. He was really out there putting the work in, and he was looking racy. Bearman really used that back straight DRS to bring him into play of the cars in front, and then would just get a nice wee dive bomb in. And I do think that Bearman is probably my driver of the day. I think it is a switch up between Esteban Ocon, who managed to get that Haas into P7, when they looked to be nowhere. Behrman, who managed to get P10, picked up a point, ran a fantastic race, did some great overtaking. This is the Behrman that I remember from last year, who was brave, who was confident, who just got the job done, got the overtakes done, was racy, and has managed to pick up a point. So I'm glad that Haas have managed to score some points, and hopefully that this sort of little bit of an upward trajectory that they've come on since last week, they can maintain into the coming races. As I said, I think it was a brilliant race for Behrman and for Ocon. They did some brilliant moves. There was some brilliant overtaking, some fantastic battles out there, and I'm glad that Haas have finally turned the car on. Moving on to Alpine, who is now the only team to not score points so far this season. They leave China as the only team without any points. And Jack Doohan, who qualified 18th, finished 16th, and Pierre Gasly, who qualified 16th, finished 11th. Oh! Fuck. Guys, we've got some breaking news, some breaking news. Leclerc and Gasly's cars have both been found to be underweight during post-race inspections, and they've both been referred to the stewards. Now, this is usually an automatic disqualification. Now, Leclerc's wing was replaced with a spare before the inspection, but has still been found to be underweight. So we will be keeping an eye on that, but I imagine it will come out pretty quickly because it is usually an automatic disqualification. So, guys, I'm on the edge of my seat now because of this. Who were we talking about? Pierre Gasly. Funny. Gasly just didn't really make an impression, to be honest with you. I think a lot of today's race was just about tyre management, obviously, and he was kind of within that pack that was quite close together. And I do think that the tyre management and the dirty air and all that kind of stuff that we've talked about before really sort of hampered his race and meant he couldn't really get further up the grid. His teammate, Jack Doohan, didn't have a great race at all, I don't think, to be honest with you. It's not looking great for Doohan. He has once again picked up a 10-second time penalty and 2 penalty points, this time for forcing Isaac Hadjar off the track. I just don't think he feels comfortable in that car. I don't think he's 100% with that machinery. And I don't think he's confident, and I think it's hurting him. He's making some silly mistakes. He looks quite scruffy. His overtakes are not clean. His battles are not clean. And when I watch him on track, I'm not massively impressed by what I'm seeing. And I don't know whether the pressure that was built up a lot pre-season, coupled with him maybe not feeling the most confident in the car, is kind of getting to him at the moment, but it's not looking good. And if it continues like this, there will be calls to have him replaced in the car. And there is a driver right there on the sidelines that is poised to take it. So, and I know it's only the second race, but when you sort of add it all up with poor qualifying performances, poor race results, scrappiness out on track. He's now in 2 races, because in the sprint race yesterday and in the race today, picked up 2 10-second time penalties and 4 penalty points. It's a bit itchy sketchy for Doohan at the moment, I would say. So I'm intrigued to see what happens as we move into the next sort of few races. But it's not looking great. Next up to another team that was a tale of two halves. A little bit more on the disappointing side. Aston Martin, with Lance Stroll, who qualified 14th, finished 12th, and Fernando Alonso, who qualified 13th, did not finish. I have to say, I feel a little bit bad for Lance Stroll because he was running actually a very good race, and I do think it was a points-worthy race. His pace was phenomenal. He ran, I think, 38 laps on his hard tyres. So he started on the hard, he went incredibly long, gained quite a good track position through everyone else stopping, that had started in front of him on medium, stopping to change their tyres. He had an incredible tyre offset when he did pit. Because of when he pitted, he kind of plummeted down a little bit too far and then couldn't get back up. There was too much of a gap to the cars in front of him to really get back up into the points positions. But it was a very, very good race for Lance Stroll, and it is very promising because the Aston Martin looked to have incredibly good pace. He looked racy. He was doing some solid overtaking and had some great battles out there. So very promising, I would say, for Lance Stroll. Oh, what the fuck's this now? Lewis Hamilton is also at risk of disqualification with excessive skid wear to blame. Now, his rearmost skids were measured after the race in the post-race inspection, and they were below the 9mm minimum thickness limit, and it has been referred to the stewards. So potentially we will have Lewis Hamilton, Charles Leclerc, and Pierre Gasly all disqualified from this race. Right, who were we talking about? I can't remember what I was just saying, but I think it was a promising race for Lance Stroll, and it sets him up good, I think, coming into the next few races, that he can sort of challenge for points. Missed out today, but I do think there is... things look promising for Lance Stroll. For his teammate Fernando Alonso, it's all just very unfortunate, to be honest with you. He had an issue with his brakes. They just completely went. And I think it was Pierre Gasly in the opening stages of the race had radioed in to say, Alonso's brakes are on fire. And then we seen Fernando sort of come off to the side, let the other cars through. He slowed right down and crawled his way back to the pit, and it was a retirement with brake issues for Alonso. It's no fault of Alonso's, and it's just incredibly unfortunate that he had to retire from the race. Brake problems, there's nothing he could have done. There's also nothing the team could have done to get it fixed and get him back out there. It's a retirement, unfortunately. Let's move on to Mercedes, and Kimi Antonelli, who qualified 8th, finished 8th, and George Russell, who qualified 2nd, finished 3rd. Listen, I think Antonelli ran a decent race out there today. Do I think it was driver of the day material? Absolutely not. I think that there is other drivers who put in a far better job than Kimi Antonelli, or a far more impressive job worthy of driver of the day. I mean, we all know it doesn't mean anything, but still, I find that a bit weird. As I said, my drivers of the day were 100% Esteban Ocon or Oliver Behrman. As I said, I think he ran an all-right race. Listen, qualifying P8, decent. Finishing P8, decent, especially with the demands of the circuit on the tyres and being in dirty air and all these kind of things. It's a good result for Antonelli. As I said, I just don't think it's driver of the day worthy. I mean, it means nothing, driver of the day. How many times have we seen driver of the day being given to someone that it's just because that's who their favourite driver is? So it is what it is. Now, George Russell. I think George was a little bit unlucky just to miss out on a P2. I think performed an incredible undercut on Lando Norris, and it paid off beautifully because when Lando Norris came out of the pits, Lando got caught up in the traffic of Lance Stroll, which allowed George Russell just to go right around the outside of turn 1. Unfortunately, Lando, obviously on fresher tyres than Lance Stroll, was able to get past him pretty quickly and then got into the DRS. The DRS is obviously incredibly powerful at China because it's such a long straight. And it meant that, unfortunately, at that time, Russell was just kind of a sitting duck for Lando because he did have a slightly fresher set of tyres just to go and make the attack. I then have to say that had there been an extra lap of the race, Russell would have gotten P2 because Lando's brakes had obviously fallen off a cliff, and you could see in that last lap just how quickly Russell was gaining on Norris, with Norris having to really take evasive action with his brakes. I have to say that I am incredibly impressed by George Russell in these opening 2 races of this season because he has been right there, unexpectedly so. And if we look at this weekend in particular, he had an incredible qualifying performance. I actually think the star of qualifying for me, where he just stuck that Mercedes P2, split the McLarens, and nobody expected that to happen. And he's then gone and ran an incredibly decent race. I have to say, I think his race craft has improved a lot from last year and his sort of former years with Mercedes. I think he's becoming a much more well-rounded driver. And I would say he is the exact right person to be the lead driver for Mercedes. I think he's doing an incredible job this year so far. I think he's being a great mentor almost to Kimi Antonelli. They seem to have developed a pretty decent bond. And as I said, his performance on track is very good. That's 2 back-to-back podiums for Mercedes, which is a team that we actually thought were going to be behind Ferrari this year. So I have to say, I think George Russell's doing an incredible job. He's doing exactly what he needs to do. And I can potentially see very quickly that Mercedes will offer him a contract extension. Now, both Mercedes drivers' contracts end at the end of this year, but I think that they've actually got an incredibly solid driver pairing. George Russell seems to have stepped into the team leader role pretty smoothly and is having some incredible performances out there. Antonelli is also having some incredible performances out there and looks incredibly promising. So I don't see there being a need for Toto to rock the boat and get a different driver in there. I think he's got a solid driver pairing, and I do actually hope that he extends the contracts for both those drivers. I think he would be foolish maybe not to. I think Mercedes will probably be pretty happy with the driver pairing they've got, especially if these drivers continue these kind of performances, because they're there. Like, George Russell is in that fight with the McLarens at this stage, which none of us expected to happen, and Antonelli is there scoring some decent points. So I think it would be foolish for them to not extend their contracts. However, as I said, we're only 2 races in, so we'll see how things go over the next few races. I don't expect any decisions on that being made soon. Moving on to the Red Bulls, and we have Liam Lawson, who qualified 20th, started from the pit lane and finished 15th, and Max Verstappen, who qualified 4th, finished 4th. I know that Verstappen had been telling us throughout the weekend just how off the pace the Red Bull was. And I don't know why, but I didn't really believe him. I thought he was just a little bit down because the quality performance hadn't been as great and all that kind of stuff. However, after watching that Grand Prix, that Red Bull lacked serious pace. Really lacked pace. And I know that there will have been an air of tyre management and all this kind of stuff, but he just looked, both the cars just looked completely off the pace. Now, Verstappen did sort of come alive in the latter stages of the race. Now, I don't know whether that was through better management of his tyres or whatnot, but he just seemed to find a little bit of something in the car to really sort of push forward. For the majority of the race, he was just kind of holding on to P6, and then by the time we got to the latter stages, he sort of came alive a little bit. He had absolutely no problem in picking off Charles Leclerc with an incredible move through turn 1 and 3. He really set things up in turn 1, going for the outside overtake, switched back to the inside of turn 2, and then went round the outside of Leclerc on turn 3. It was an incredible overtake, and it shows just how good a racer Max Verstappen is. And as I said, he just kind of sort of came alive in the latter stages of the race. I don't know whether that was through his tyres going through that difficult graining phase and then coming out the other side and getting a little bit more grip, but he really came alive, and it was encouraging to see. That car is incredibly difficult to drive. We all know that. He's even admitted that now, that it is a difficult car to drive. It looks to be way more difficult than the sister team RB. I actually think if you took Max and put him in that RB, he'd probably finish where he's finishing now in that Red Bull. I'm not too worried about Max because I think he knows exactly what he's got with Red Bull. There's been a lot of talk about Max jumping ship, and, you know, he was asked today by Rachel Brooks if Red Bull continued to struggle with the car, would he make that decision to vacate the team? Whilst it's a valid question and his answer was no, he said he was incredibly happy where he was. I think a lot of that is down to that whole thing is built around Max, purely because it has to be, because the second driver is so far off that they can't risk changing the car too much and upsetting Verstappen in it, because Verstappen is the star of that show. He is the one that is scoring the big points. He's bringing them in championships when other drivers are really struggling. If they went and made huge changes to the car to, say, suit Liam Lawson, that could really upset Max, and it could mean that both those drivers are further down the field rather than having one scoring really good points. So say he went to Mercedes, they didn't bring Kimi Antonelli in, and it was Max Verstappen and George Russell at Mercedes. Max is then fighting with another driver who is right there, who wants certain things for the car and all this kind of stuff, and it's not all sort of focused around Max like Red Bull has to be, because he's the only one that can score them any points at the moment. And it's a flip of the coin, because you could say, well, if you made it a bit more of an even car, Liam Lawson would be further up and they could double score points, but that's not going to happen, to be quite honest with you. So I can see fully why they sort of prioritise Max and why they create cars that really sort of suit Max's aggressive driving style, and it doesn't really suit the others, because time and time again, Max is the one that is going out there and bringing home the solid points for the team. And again, I understand the flip side of the argument being, well, if you make a car that prioritises Max, you're literally cursing the second seat, because no driver can, you know, perform like Max in the car because it's too difficult for them. But they've got themselves in between a rock and a hard place, because anything they do is going to be the wrong move. They either sacrifice the second seat, unfortunately, which they're kind of doing now, or they sacrifice Max, and I just don't think that's an option for Red Bull to sacrifice Max. Speaking of that cursed second seat in Red Bull, Liam Lawson. Now, Liam started from the pit lane because the team changed the suspension on the car. They went for, as what Liam said, a quite aggressive setup. And I just don't think it paid off for them at all because, again, he was absolutely nowhere. His pace was shocking. He really struggled with that car. He was one of the few drivers that started on the hard tyre to sort of go for a quite a long first stint, and he struggled with those hard tyres. The whole thing was just a struggle for him, to be quite honest with you. And I have to say, I feel sorry for Liam. I really feel sorry for him because we know he's a good driver. We've seen him drive decently before, and I think any way you slice it, Liam would be struggling in that Red Bull. Whether he'd stayed at VCarb for half a season or a full season this year and then moved to Red Bull, he would still be struggling in that car. I don't think it is a lack of experience. I think it is just that Red Bull car. I think there is a lack of experience in Red Bull, but him being at VCarb for another season was never going to fix it. He's driving something that's a completely different style of car. The VCarb is a lot smoother and the Red Bull is way more aggressive. So you've got two completely different style of cars. Whether he was at VCarb for another year or not would have made no difference. I do find it interesting that he didn't really do much training. Bernie Collins made a sort of good point after the race when she was talking with Karun and Natalie. Fuck off! Leclerc's been disqualified. Probably means Gasly's been disqualified. Probably means Hamilton's been disqualified. Fuck's sake! All right, we're just waiting on the others coming in. Back to Lawson. Bernie made a good point that Lawson did no real testing in a Red Bull car. Now, Antonelli did heaps and heaps and heaps of testing in old Mercedes cars, and he could do that because they were old enough that it didn't affect any of the cost cap or anything like that. Lawson did next to no running in old Red Bulls. Oh, Gasly's disqualified. Gasly's been disqualified, for fuck's sake. Oh, the drama! Sorry, I'm all over the place because these are just coming in now, but Lawson did next to no testing in an old Red Bull, and I just don't understand why, because although the cars are different, it would have been still testing in quite an aggressive car. The Red Bulls have always been pretty aggressive, and I think it's almost like a setting up for failure. And you could sort of make the point that maybe Red Bull didn't know that Lawson was going to be brought into the team for this year, and I think I'd have to call bullshit on that, to be quite honest with you, because I actually genuinely believe that as soon as they made the choice, or even before the choice was made to get rid of Checo, they knew that they were going to bring Liam Lawson into it. They could have had Liam Lawson testing in old Red Bull cars just to get him up to pace with this type of machinery, this really aggressive car. They've given him next to nothing, and they're expecting him to go out there and bring it home in points and close to Max Verstappen. I just think the team have really set him up to fail. I'm seeing a lot of rumours about potentially Lawson being dropped down to VCarb in Japan and Isaac Hadjar moving into the Red Bull spot. Again, don't think that's the right call at all. I don't know where these rumours are coming from, but there seems to be no smoke without fire, and it does feel like Red Bull is just inherent on putting drivers into that car when they're not ready to be in that machinery. It's a strange one. I just don't understand it, to be quite honest with you. I think the big question is, who gets dropped first? Jack Doohan or Liam Lawson? I think it's neck and neck at the moment, I think, because Flavio Briatore will not be keen on having Jack Doohan in that car, qualifying poorly, being scrappy out on track and, racking up penalty points and 10-second penalties and then, having poor race results. But Red Bull also can't afford to have Liam Lawson qualifying poorly and having bad race results and also being quite scrappy and quite messy out on track. So who knows? Could be either of them. I actually think both Lawson and Doohan will not finish the season in the teams they are in through either just getting dropped completely or getting dropped to another team. But I actually don't know who would go first. I think it's neck and neck at the moment. All right, moving on to Ferrari, and we have Lewis Hamilton, who qualified 5th, finished 6th, and Charles Leclerc, who qualified 6th, finished 5th, and was disqualified. Well, for fuck's sake, Hamilton was disqualified as well. Oh, fuck my life being a Ferrari fan. This is fucking depressing, this shit. What do you even say at this point? They were there, they got disqualified. For Leclerc, I have to say, I don't actually know what the fuck was going on with him because he had a bit of a love tap shall we say, with Lewis Hamilton and lost his front wing end plate, but still showed decent pace, to be honest with you. I was quite surprised at that. I don't know whether because the circuit is so front left heavy that the broken wing plate kind of evened things out. Bernie Collins was saying something about that, so I'm not entirely too sure, but he had some decent pace, and I was surprised when they didn't change his front wing, but I'm assuming they did that because if they changed it, he would have lost more time in the pits and would have been further down the grid and would have had to fight through more of the pack, where if they could just get him out, it was, damage limitation. He did do a pretty decent race. He showed some incredible pace, and I thought, oh, he could potentially get a podium. I'm fucking glad he didn't now because he's been disqualified, but things were looking that he could actually catch Russell, but he just ended up backing off a little bit. I think he just had to really manage his tyres. Obviously, Leclerc did a one-stop race. Hamilton chose to do a second stop because he was hurting out there. His tyres were really, really hurting, and he actually made the choice to let Leclerc through because he didn't want to hold his teammate up, which was very nice to see. Just that sort of thinking about the team and not just about yourself. Hamilton, when he pitted for fresh tyres the second time, he actually showed some pretty decent pace. He only lost one position just for how spread out the grid was. And I have to say that I think that both the drivers, with the pace that they showed, it was promising. Again, it's all for nothing because they got disqualified. It's still very clear to me that Ferrari have not worked out the correct style and amount of communication between Lewis Hamilton and his race engineer, Riccardo Adami. There was actually a point during the race where Hamilton came over the radio and was like, guys, give me some feedback. Come on, I need feedback. Where am I losing? And Riccardo came back and was like, the exit of 13. And he's like, yeah, you've told me that already. And it is clear that they just haven't figured out exactly what amount and what style of communication Lewis Hamilton needs that works for Lewis, that works for the Ferrari, and it's obviously just a very big learning curve for both Hamilton and Ferrari. They are going to need to get that nailed down pretty quickly, though, because it is obviously hurting Lewis's performance. They need to get that sorted. It's the same as sometimes you hear Charles Leclerc being like, yep, you've already told me this, can you leave me alone? And you see it actually up and down the grid that race engineers will tell the drivers things, and they're like, I don't need to hear it right now. I'm focusing on something, or you've already told me this, and it just seems to be a little bit of a bigger breakdown between Lewis and Ricciardo. I think it's just because it's new, but they are going to want to get that sorted out. But it's all for nothing because they got disqualified. Now, the 3 disqualifications of Pierre Gasly, Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc are huge for Williams and for Haas. These 3 disqualifications mean that Sainz has moved up to P10 and scored his first points for Williams. It also means that Ocon moves up to 5th and Behrman moves up to 8th, which means that Haas are leaving China with a huge 14 points. The top 10 is now as follows, with Carlos Sainz in P10, Lance Stroll P9, Behrman 8th, Albon 7th, Antonelli 6th, Ocon 5th, and the top 4 are unchanged with Max Verstappen 4th, George Russell 3rd, Lando Norris 2nd, and Oscar Piastri 1st. Now, let's round this up with McLaren, and we have Lando Norris, who qualified 3rd, finished 2nd, and Oscar Piastri 1st, finished 1st. I think the McLaren boys ran incredibly good races. I have to say, a solid result for Lando Norris, especially with his brakes going at the end. His brake pedal went long, and he just wasn't really getting any use of the brakes. You could see he was really struggling in that final lap to get the car slowed down through the end, using the engine to slow it down, to be honest with you. And you could see just how much it was affecting him because the times between him and Russell were just tumbling down. Russell was gaining on him immensely. But a solid result, bringing it home P2. Solid result for Oscar Piastri, who drove pretty much perfectly from pole to flag and should be incredibly proud of himself. A phenomenal win for Oscar Piastri. Very well deserved, superb. What will be interesting is McLaren have obviously built an incredibly quick car. It is the fastest car on that grid by, as I've said before, by about 3/10. Now, there will become a point where there will be a sort of intra-team battle, because if McLaren keeps going the way it's going now, with Oscar winning some races and Lando winning some races and them just kind of taking points away from each other and race wins away from each other, there will become a little bit of a battle between those two drivers. And I know McLaren is quite happy to let them drive, but there will become a point where they might need to make a decision of who to back, because there is a very real threat right now from the likes of George Russell, potentially Max Verstappen if they can sort of get the car to a sort of happy place for Max. Ferrari are kind of there, but with this disqualification, they've got a lot more work to do. I'm interested to see how McLaren as a team will handle this potential battle between the two drivers as we get further into the year and things become a little bit more critical, where the choices and the decisions have to be made. That being said, it was a stunning result for McLaren. Superb drives from both those drivers. It's clear that they are the team to beat, that those are the drivers to beat, and it'll be interesting going into the rest of the year to see how these two get on. And I do just believe that it is going to be these two fighting for the wins, and you might occasionally get a wee George Russell or something popping up. But so it is quite exciting for that team. It's just, for our sake, I hope that the other teams sort of catch up to McLaren through upgrades and stuff like that the rest of the year, because I want there to be such interesting and dynamic fights for these race wins, and I want there to be a real championship fight, not just between the two drivers, but between the teams as well. And that is everything from us from a fairly boring on-track Chinese Grand Prix that is filled with drama off-track, left us with quite a few questions, some teams and drivers needing to find a little bit more, and a very promising result for quite a few teams, I have to say. I think those disqualifications have worked beautifully for Haas and for Williams. McLaren have had a stunning result. George Russell is a little bit of a sleeper cell at the moment. I am very impressed by him. Some big questions over at Red Bull and just all-round disappointment at Ferrari, but we're used to that now, aren't we? That is everything from us. There is 10 days now to the next Grand Prix, where we go to Japan, but we'll be back before then. We'll see you very soon. Enjoy the rest of your day. Love you. Bye!